I want to begin with to share a true story. It happened several years ago, right before I left Holy Family, actually, to come here to St. Monica's. But it's stuck in my head. It was a powerful story. So, began with a parishioner I'll call Steve. I've changed names here. But so Steve was eating at one of these East Side restaurants. And when he saw one of the employees, I'll call Lucas, who was bussing tables there at the restaurant. And he was wearing a mask. This was back in the COVID or just after COVID times. So that wasn't unusual, but then Steve caught a glimpse of Lucas with a mask off back in the back room there. And he couldn't help but stare because Lucas' nose was greatly extended and his cheeks were covered with these layers of these yellow and red pustules. It's kind of like this elephant man look. And this disfigurement is called rhinophema. It's an incurable condition that can nevertheless be treated and controlled by surgery, proper behavior, medication. So that night, Steve was just kind of going to bed, and the Holy Spirit throughout the night was kind of bringing up Lucas into his memory. And he woke up thinking, I've got to do something to help this guy. So he started searching online for a doctor who could help. And he found a guy in Bellevue who worked on rhinophema. And next day, or shortly after that, I forget, Steve tracked down Lucas at the restaurant. He's a little embarrassed to approach him because, again, how do you say, you're ugly, but I want to help? But that's kind of the situation. But Lucas's reaction, Steve said, was immediately profound gratitude and excitement. He was young, 30-something, and nobody had ever helped him. He had never been on a date because of his appearance. So his life was isolated. Again, a modern leper, so to speak. So Lucas had no financial means. He busted tables. He had nothing he could do to pay for medicine. So you can imagine his excitement when Steve says, I'm going to pay for this whole thing. And he introduces him to this surgeon, and Lucas needed to take some antibiotics and other treatments to get the inflammation down in his face. And then surgery. Again, the pustules needed to be cut off. His nose and cheeks had to be reshaped some. But it worked. Now it's constant care. He has to avoid the sun. He has to eat right. He has to get enough sleep. There's medications that have to be applied. But people are no longer staring at him. He's no longer the leper that he was. So in our gospel today, we have the story. I remember this story because of the gospel passage where we have the story of the leper who begs Jesus to help him. Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, I do will it, be made clean. So Ash Wednesday is this coming Wednesday. A few days and we start Lent. And in preparation for that season, I thought that, again, I wanted to use this story of Steve and Lucas, the modern leper, to suggest two ways that we might implement Lent in our lives. So the first thing I thought of is in terms of, we have a tendency to think of Lent as giving things up. And that's part of it. That's part of it. It's also about almsgiving. Sometimes it's about giving to other people. And sometimes that's money. That's good. I'm not against that at all. And Steve was an almsgiver in this way, certainly. It ended up costing about $15,000 to do this. Frankly, Steve could afford it. That's his situation. We do not have, all of us, $15,000 to give away. But acting like, or actually acting as Jesus doesn't actually cost $15,000. So it usually costs much less, and on the other hand, much more, if we really look at what it is to imitate Christ. So for Steve, the big gift to Lucas was not the money. For many of us, that would be it. That'd be huge. I don't have $15,000. But it was the time, it was the involvement. It was committing his life in some ways to that project. And that's what struck me. That Steve didn't simply pity Lucas or write a check, although he did that. He did both. But he committed himself. He contacted Lucas a stranger. He found a doctor for him. He went and, he walked with him through the steps. Again, it's not easy to go through the medical system. Lucas wasn't good at that, so Steve was the advocate. That's a lot of time. And so, listen to that story. What went through my mind, certainly I was impressed just by the fact that this guy was committing himself, and it's a happy ending story, so I remember it. But then I started to think about myself. Would I have done that? Seriously, even if I had $15,000, would I have gotten involved with a stranger that was living this horrible life? Maybe I'd feel embarrassed about it, but most importantly, I'm not sure I want to get sucked into the story, not knowing what it really is, how long it would take, what it would be asked. If I start stepping out that way, where's it going to end? That's the way my mind would work. That would be the bigger cost more than any financial considerations. So I was thinking this Lent, in terms of almsgiving, not writing off at all monetary donations. That's an important piece too. And that might be what God calls us to do. But I was also thinking of the idea of maybe a commitment. Is there somebody in my life, or your life, that I'm feeling called to make some sort of commitment to help this person flourish in some ways? And I've been holding off because I'm thinking, I'm not sure I want to get into that. But this person could really use this, and it's not so much money they need, it's my involvement. But I don't know if I want to get involved. So that would be something to discern, because that would be a true alms. Again, time, concern, listening, that's sometimes more important than the money. It's sometimes a bigger deal. So maybe that, rather than giving money, maybe that. Second point, I thought from that story, the second takeaway for Lent that I saw comes not from trying to imagine myself as Steve. That's good. But to see myself as Lucas. To see myself as Lucas. So I was always wondering about this guy. Did he avoid mirrors his whole life? He said, I can't look in that. Or was he obsessed with the mirror? That I'm just looking at myself. Every day I look at myself. I don't know which way it breaks. But Ryan Fema, it's not leprosy, but it might as well be. It greatly disfigures the body and leads to isolation. Sounds like leprosy. Remember in our first reading from Leviticus 13. If you have leprosy, you're going outside the city, you're saying, I'm unclean, I'm unclean, I'm unclean. That means I have to isolate. This is what he had. This is what Lucas had. Now, most of us don't have that physical disfigurement. But what about spiritual leprosy? I was thinking, what if you could actually see the effects of sin on our souls? What if they had a physical manifestation somehow? What would I look like? Would I be willing to look into that mirror if the mirror was something that would reflect back on me and show me, here's what you look like in terms of Jesus' vision. He sees our sins. He knows everything. And he wants to help. He more or less says, you're ugly, but I'm here to help you. And sometimes we don't think we're ugly. We think, oh, we're pretty good. Physically, maybe. But what if I really had a chance to reflect upon myself in terms of sin? Would I react like Lucas did to Steve with tearful gratitude at the hope of this soul doctor cutting off and out my sin, applying this ongoing medication of Jesus' forgiveness and mercy? How do I react to that possibility? And I was thinking about, how do I react to confession? If in fact Jesus does look at me and he says, I see what you're going through, and I see how this sin cuts you off from me. There's an isolation here from me at least, and sometimes my sin isolates me from others. Do I look at that sacrament of mercy and reconciliation as medication surgery that I desperately need so that, again, my situation can be healed? So one of the practices of Lent is a confession. Now, it's not just for Lent, of course. But if we haven't been for a long time, maybe it is time to look in that spiritual mirror and say, I've been avoiding that. I didn't want to look in that mirror because if I go down into my conscience and I really reflect, I know there's stuff there that I don't really want to think about. But it's there. Jesus sees it, it's disfiguring our soul, I think we need to look in the mirror. Because sin's kind of like rhinophema. It's ugly, it keeps us going, and it keeps coming back after the surgery unless we do the medication. It's an ongoing lifetime process. So, again, confessions Monday through Saturday, 7:15, 7:35. Friday evenings, 6 to 7. Saturday afternoons, 3:30 to 4:30. Lenten penance service, Saturday morning, March 9th, 10:30, 11:30. There's also this other chance, if you were listening to the announcements before Mass, Father Bill Watson has this program of a 4-week reflection and prayer upon making a whole life confession. And this means that if you participate in this, you can find it in the bulletin or online for our website, but you participate in getting like these daily downloads of prayer and reflection upon preparing to write a letter to Jesus that you then read out at a confession. There will be a particular special penance service with some priests just for those who participate in this program. You take this letter, you have a chance to reflect upon your whole life. And then say, here, again, think about Lucas. It's been 33 years this stuff had been building up on him. And what a difference it made to his life when he said, it's gone. Not forever, I have to work on it. But no, people are no longer staring at me. I'm no longer ugly. I'm healthy. So, Lent is coming up. I remember the story of Stephen Lucas because it reminds me of Jesus in the gospel we just heard. And it seemed to me that's what God's grace should feel like. And we're all Lucas. And we all can be Steve if we let Jesus, the true soul doctor, into our lives in that deep way. This is what Lent is about, letting the cross of Christ lead us to the resurrection of a new life.